Welcome, fellow armchair generals and curious minds. Today, we're not here to talk about the military superpowers with their flashy jets and big-budget blockbusters. No, we're taking a light-hearted journey to explore the underdogs, the benchwarmers, and the little guys of the military world. These nations might not top the charts in terms of firepower or strategic might, but they certainly deserve some recognition, if only for their ability to maintain a military in the face of overwhelming odds, and budgets that could probably fit into your average shopping cart. So, grab your popcorn, and let's find out some of the world's weakest militaries. And before we begin, don't forget to subscribe. Iceland. Iceland, settled in the late 9th and 10th centuries AD, and home to the world's oldest legislative assembly, established in 930 AD. Ruled by Norway and Denmark, Iceland became completely independent in 1944. As a strategic linchpin for NATO, Iceland controls naval traffic from Russia into the Atlantic. However, Iceland has no actual military, only an internal police force. Despite this, it remains strategically important to NATO for detecting, tracking, and denying exit into the Atlantic to Russian submarines. Madagascar. Madagascar, late to human settlement with major settlers arriving around AD 350, became a pirate stronghold in the 17th and 18th centuries. Conquered by France in 1896, it became independent in 1960. The military, with 13,500 active duty personnel, has been criticized for lacking accountability. They focus on anti-piracy, smuggling, and drug trafficking missions, and safeguarding fishing grounds. Their equipment includes 12 Soviet PT-76 amphibious light tanks and a mix of Cold War and even World War II-era armored cars. The Navy relies on several patrol boats and smaller patrol craft, some produced just after World War I. Panama. Panama gained independence from Spain in 1821, joined the Republic of Gran Colombia, and later remained part of Colombia. With U.S. assistance, Panama gained independence, leading to the construction of the Panama Canal. The U.S. transferred ownership of the canal to Panama by the end of the 20th century. A U.S. invasion in 1989 deposed dictator Manuel Noriega. Panama has no national military, only a paramilitary force called the Panamanian Public Forces, PNP. The PNP numbers around 80,000, focusing on internal defense, counterterrorism, and counter-narcotics operations. They operate no heavy equipment. El Salvador. Known for its sky-high homicide rates, this place has had a wild history. They fought for independence from Spain in 1821 and then again from the Central American Federation in 1839. Fast forward to the 1980s, they were caught up in a 12-year civil war that killed 75,000 people and finally wrapped up with a peace treaty in 1992. Today, their military is all about tackling gang violence. With about 25,000 active personnel split between the Army, Navy, and Air Force, they're working with older American equipment and no heavy combat platforms, except for 10 French-made AML-90 armored scout vehicles. Not exactly the latest tech, right? Botswana. This country has had its share of historic conflicts, like stopping Afrikaner settlers in 1852, and it became a British protectorate in 1885, finally gaining independence in 1966. Despite a high AIDS infection rate, Botswana is known for its strong democratic rule and progressive policies. Their military, the Botswana Defense Force, includes Ground Forces Command, Air Arm Command, and Defense Logistics Command, with up to 21,000 personnel. They're big on disaster relief and anti-poaching, using 45 light tanks, 20 Austrian SK-105s, and 25 British FV-1010s, and some aging light fighter aircraft. It's not the Avengers, but for sure they get the job done. Nepal. This country successfully fought off British colonialism in the Anglo-Nepalese War, and has a strong bond with Britain, which recruits Gurkhas from Nepal. They dealt with a Maoist insurgency with some support from Great Britain against Chinese influence. Nepal's military boasts about 95,000 active personnel with solid counter-terrorism chops and supports over 40 UN peacekeeping missions. Their fleet is mainly scout cars and mine-resistant vehicles, not bad for a country nestled in the Himalayas. Montenegro. Recognized as a sovereign state in 1878, was absorbed into Yugoslavia in 1918, regained independence in 2006, and joined NATO in 2017. With 2350 active personnel, including NATO-trained special forces, Montenegro's military is modernizing rapidly to NATO standards, ditching old Soviet equipment for better gear. They still operate Cold War M84 tanks and Soviet T-72 variants. It's a small but modernizing force, adapting to new standards. Senegal, a country continuously that has been inhabited since the Paleolithic era and ruled by various empires before the French colonized it in the 19th century, gaining their freedom in 1959. Known for its stability and democracy, despite a low-level insurgency, Senegal's military includes 17,000 active personnel with goodwill civilian government relations. They're active in UN peacekeeping and regional mediation, using a mix of international equipment, including 12 Chinese tank destroyers and 26 IFVs. Their navy is all about anti-piracy and illegal fishing operations. They're not rolling in the latest tech, but they're handling their business. Liberia, a country that hosts 28 ethnic groups and was never colonized by European powers. The US relocated freed slaves to Liberia in the 19th century, leading to its declaration of independence in 1847. However, tensions between freed American slaves and natives sparked a military coup in 1980 and a brutal civil war in 1989. After a successful restructuring in 2017, Liberia's military, rebuilt with US help in 2007, consists of about 1,500 staff members, primarily in 2 light infantry battalions. Burkina Faso. Now, Burkina Faso has a decently rich history, once home to powerful kingdoms before becoming a French protectorate in the late 19th century and gaining independence in 1960. They've seen a lot of coups, with a stable government from 1987 to 2014, and then 2 coups in 2022. Nowadays, they're dealing with terrorism and food insecurity. Their military has about 12,000 active personnel and a 4,500-strong paramilitary force, focusing on extremist groups like Al-Qaeda. They're using a mix of old Soviet gear and donated equipment with no heavy combat vehicles. Think of it as an old-school army trying to keep up in a modern world. Would you like to donate a few pieces of equipment to Burkina Faso? If so, tell us what it would be in the comments below and don't forget to subscribe. Somalia. Once colonized by Britain and Italy, gained independence in 1960, but saw its democracy collapse in 1969, leading to a 22-year rule of General Mohammed Siad Barre. The state fell into anarchy after Barre was overthrown in 1991, and despite a central government, the country faces ongoing conflict and terrorism. The Somali military, with around 15,000 personnel, includes the US-trained Danab Advanced Infantry Brigade and the Turkish-trained Gorgor Special Division, heavily assisted by the African Union mission in Somalia. Suriname, settled by the English in the mid-17th century and later a Dutch colony, gained independence in 1975. After a military regime briefly replaced the civilian government in 1980, Suriname saw democratic elections in 1987 and a return to democracy in 1991. Their military, about 2,000 personnel strong, focuses on combating the drug trade and securing borders, operating a few patrol vessels with 3 new ones on order from France, but lacking significant combat vehicles. Moldova, a former Russian Empire province unified into Romania after World War I and reabsorbed by the Soviet Union post-World War II, gained independence in 1991. With the breakaway region of Transnistria hosting around 2,000 Russian troops, Moldova struggles with Russian aggression and post-Soviet corruption while aiming to join the EU. Moldova's military, consisting of 8,500 personnel, is mostly equipped with antiquated Soviet gear, although NATO is assisting in modernizing their forces to resist Russian threats. Bhutan, which signed a treaty with Britain in the early 20th century, granting control over internal affairs, later signed a similar treaty with India in 1949. Bhutan relies heavily on India for military protection, equipment, and air defense. Their military, about 7,500 personnel, conducts internal counterinsurgency operations and guards forests, entirely dependent on India for protection against Chinese expansion. Central African Republic, a country located at an important trade crossroads in the trans-Saharan era. Engaged heavily in the slave trade, causing lasting ethnic tensions, it was colonized by the French in 1903, with brutal control subcontracted to private companies. Although France banned the slave trade in 1910, exploitation continued. The country gained independence in 1960, but quickly fell into political struggles. Jean Bedel Bokassa launched a coup in 1966, ruling with terror and changing the country's name to the Central African Empire in 1976. Bokassa was overthrown in 1979 with French aid, and the nation has been in constant sectarian conflict since. With 1,000 active duty soldiers, the military focuses on providing security along vital transportation corridors and mining sites, often hiring local militias to aid in fighting or tracking anti-government rebels. Sierra Leone. Sierra Leone has been continuously populated for the last 2,500 years, protected by jungles and rugged terrain. It became a British trading post for timber, ivory, and slaves in the 17th century. Freed slaves were relocated to Sierra Leone after the abolition of the slave trade, and it gained full independence in 1961. However, the country experienced a civil war in 1991 that displaced over 2 million people and killed tens of thousands. A West African coalition installed a new prime minister in 1998, and the civil war ended in 2002. Free elections were held until significant irregularities in the 2023 election. Sierra Leone's military, restructured with British help after the Civil War, consists of approximately 13,000 personnel, operating 10 OT-64s and 3 Caspier armored personnel carriers. Their navy has about 500 personnel with small craft, and officers are trained in the UK. They also claim to have 2 Mi-24 Russian attack helicopters, though their operational status is unknown. Belize, a Central American nation influenced by Spanish and British spheres in the 17th and 18th centuries, was colonized by the British in 1862, with independence delayed by territorial disputes with Guatemala. It gained full independence in 1981, and Guatemala recognized it in 1992. Belize's military, approximately 1,650 strong, includes ground forces and a coast guard, with security ensured by a British Army base that serves as a critical training hub for jungle warfare. Mauritania, one of the cradles of early human civilization. This country developed agriculture early on and has a social structure marked by old tribal and ethnic divisions and a strict caste system. Colonized by the French, Mauritania gained independence in 1960 but struggled with dictatorships and failed attempts at democracy until a peaceful power transition in 2019. Slavery was outlawed in 1981 but only criminalized in 2007. While the country suffers from extremism, there have been no terrorist attacks since 2011. Mauritania's military consists of 32,000 active duty personnel, using significantly old equipment like 35 T-55 tanks and a small number of armored reconnaissance vehicles and personnel carriers. Their air force has at least 4 Super Tucano attack aircraft for counter-terrorism operations. Gabon, an oil-rich country considered one of the most stable in Africa, engaged in trade with Europeans, and was a hub for the Atlantic slave trade. Colonized by France, which exploited its resources, Gabon did not seek independence until the 1960s. Its stability was tested in 2023 by a military coup. Gabon's military includes 4,800 active duty personnel with no reservist system. They lack armor, but operate armored recon vehicles like the French AML-90 and 32 infantry fighting vehicles. The Navy operates 3 coastal patrol vessels and 1 landing craft, with another on order from France. Kosovo became an autonomous Serbian province in the Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia after World War II. Albanian nationalism in the 1980s led to a movement for independence, and Kosovo's autonomy was cancelled in 1989, leading to an insurgency. In 1998, NATO intervened to stop Serbian counterinsurgency operations. Kosovo became independent in 2008, though Serbia rejects this. Kosovo's military, with about 1,000 active duty personnel, is trained to NATO standards but lacks heavy equipment. They are equipped with modern armored patrol vehicles like the M1117 Guardian from the US and receive ongoing support from America and the West with expectations to join NATO. And that's a wrap! So what do you guys think? Which one of these militaries interests you the most and why? Share us your thoughts in the comments, subscribe, and until the next time!